This might look like a 4X game that we have set up on the table here, but it's not quite a 4X game. This one is called Stardriven Gateway. This is from Rock Manor Games, and it does some of the things, some of the X's you'll find here, but it leans far more into a very narrative, adventure-y sort of feel to the game.
Yeah, you can definitely feel the inspirations of this game as you play it, or even as we kind of break down what the game is doing. But the X that it really focuses on is that explore. Yeah. This throws you out into space, but it's not an area control game. It's not like troops on the map game. In fact, you only have one spaceship that you're flying around with the entire game that you're staffing with crew and then going to a variety of different planets and locations in order to help solve different crises.
Yes.
So, where's its inspiration a little on the sleeve?
Star Trek or Mass Effect or other classic adventure-y sort of science fiction. This game does that, but also does it with a lot of the same sorts of things you'd expect from games like this. I would say it probably leans a little less on the conflict, although there can be some.
Yeah, there definitely can be conflict in the game, and we just wanted to say right off the bat, because this really does kind of look and feel and play a little bit like what you'd expect from a 4X, but there are some twists along the way. One of those twists being that the game is solo, it is competitive, and it is also cooperative.
It's because it's episodic.
And because it is episodic, and a lot of this is determined by the episode that you're playing. And some of these episodes are going to be competitive, and some of them are going to be cooperative. Now, when we say episodes, we're not really saying,
like, no campaign.
Yeah, it's not a campaign where you have to play all 8 in a row. There's 8 different episodes. Yeah. But you will play through probably all 8 of them as you play, and you can pick your favorites and come back to them. They primarily change that gameplay idea of either playing competitively or cooperatively. They also change how you score, and they will also maybe even change how the board is set up. So some of the later episodes start to introduce new mechanics, which we'll kind of touch on as well. We've only played through some of the early stuff, so we haven't even seen everything that this game can offer yet.
Yeah, we have the game set up here, and we kind of set it up and played a couple rounds into it just so you could see something more than the initial board game state. But largely what you're seeing here, and it must be said, this is a prototype. It is undergoing quite a few changes in terms of the pieces and parts that you see. But you mostly see the initial board state. I've moved over to a planet. Ryan's moved out here. We've got the Warbound chasing Ryan at the moment. I've completed a mission, but largely you're going to see a lot of these different sections of the board with these tokens that have things that you can discover, but not only that, you're going to ultimately flip these tokens to actually discover various sectors of space with locations that you're going to want to go to complete some of these missions over here. You'll see a lot of the same sort of artwork here that you'll see as you discover things on this board.
Yeah, and the board is seated face down with all those different tokens. We both start on different council planets, which are these planets that are named. And yeah, a big part of the game is getting out there and completing these missions. These are going to give you a variety of different rewards. They will also give you victory points at the end of the game when you're scoring the game as well. But getting to these missions is a multi-step process. Now, some of them want you to go to a specific planet, and some of those can be easy. If the planet's already face up, you kind of know where you're going. But a lot of them are looking for very specific features like meteors or comets or abandoned vessels that you don't necessarily have at the start of the game. You have to kind of move around and explore the galaxy in order to find those and then complete the missions. Now, it's beneficial to explore anyway because, like David said, you're flipping over these tokens.
Yeah.
A lot of these tokens give you something positive anyway, so you are kind of encouraged to explore just for the sake of exploring, but you will find some of these special mission locations.
Yeah, and some of those tokens are positive, but some of those tokens are
true.
Not necessarily positive. Some of them are anomalies. The first 3 that I found as we played this just now were anomalies, and when you have an anomaly, again, that spirit of adventure, you're going to take an anomaly card, you're going to read it. There's going to be some flavor text that I won't ruin any here for you, but then there's a thing that has to be done. You basically have to resolve this thing. Typically, it's going to be some damaging thing to your ship, to your crew, something you have to deal with, or maybe you can spend some things if you've prepared to avoid it. Then you're able to actually research it and keep it for a one-time use power later in the game, or you can just simply discard it and keep the anomaly token, which also could have implications later in the game.
Yeah, they can score points or give you some benefits for the scenario. So yeah, they're not all positive. There's also some that will just launch enemy ships, which Again, we talked briefly about this idea that Warbound are chasing me right now. This is just an enemy ship that exists, an enemy faction that exists out in the galaxy. They don't like us coming along and researching and helping these people, so they have sent their giant ships after us and their small little interceptors. And the giant ships moves around the board trying to destroy your colonies that you might place or your outposts, and the little interceptors fly out and try to attack and defeat you. A big part of the conflict of the game is fighting them. You can fight other players. It's definitely not as beneficial to you as it is fighting the Warbound. You actually get some bonuses for doing damage to the Warbound at certain stages, so you are encouraged to fight, just like you're kind of encouraged to come out and do these missions. All of these things are going to get you points, but you're not really doing any of that well without building up your crew on your ship, which again, that is the other major thing I think you're doing in this game.
Yeah, I would say this is the biggest thing that we want to spend the most time talking about. You have this ship board that's going to house your crew, all your various stations where you're going to assign those crew, and the whole game is driven by dice placement. You're going to roll a number of dice, and all of this is variable. My ship was very
asymmetric.
Yeah, very different than Ryan's ship. My crew is different than Ryan's crew. Depending on where I place them, it might have different impacts. But you're going to roll those dice up, and then on your turn, you're going to take 2 actions. A lot of those actions are going to be driven by taking one of those die and placing it in one of the different centers to actually do what that center does.
Yeah, and that is something that you're trying to balance all throughout the game, because most of these locations and even some of the abilities that you're taking, including these specific ship abilities that you get to choose at the start of the game, again, asymmetric, are all kind of controlled by your energy consumption. You have this energy track that's going to move up and down as you take actions. Most of the actions that you take, at least most of the ship actions, cost you energy. And then one, navigation, which is like your jump, your light speed jump.
Yeah, that's warp.
Your warp, it actually generates energy for you while you're warping. So you're kind of balancing. There's other ways to collect energy. There's other ways to get energy back. But every dice spot that you place is going to cost some amount of energy. And then it's going to activate based on the strength of the die. Now you'll notice, David mentioned, we have different starting dice. So I'm much better at the blue, which is science, than I am at like the green, which is travel. And you'll notice that a lot of these spaces require you to have a specific color dice placed there. However, you can generally use a wild in a lot of these locations, which means you can use any die, but it does tend to cost more energy to do so.
Right. For example, I'm very weak on the command red dice, so I'm not going to be going out there looking for a lot of conflict. I kind of built mine as a cargo ship. A lot of my powers seem to revolve around cargo. So I'm trying to take things around, trying to get some of those missions done. And again, we have all of these different stations that we're going to use. We don't want to go into a full how to play to talk about each and every one of those, but just to give you an idea of how it interacts with the board. You know, for example, we've got helm and navigation, which do similar things. Helm is going to be used by placing green die, or like Ryan said, any die in this bottom spot, depending on whether or not you want to spend the energy, to actually move around the board based on the value of the die that you place there. You're going to basically move section to section, and that's not each individual tile, but each tile you can see has 3 sectors on it. Whereas navigation is a little bit different. We touched on this a second ago. This is going to build energy, but it's also sort of that warp. So you're going to place a die, and then you're going to look at the board to see if there's any location that has that gravity value. So I used a 6 here, which is what took me to this place here, which has a gravity value of 6. So you can instantly go there.
Yeah, and it's worth noting that all of the unexplored spaces that you see out here all have a gravity value of 1, which means you'll either want to move there with the helm, or you have to have a 1 die to use a navigation. But as you reveal them, they actually do change their gravity values. So this, for example, becomes a 3 when it's explored. So the more that the galaxy is explored, the more you're going to have those different values and to travel elsewhere. Now, one thing we didn't mention that I'll talk about now is that a lot of your crew do have abilities. When a crew is put out, it does 2 things for you. First of all, it lets you use that action space. You have to have a crew there. But secondly, you can exhaust them, turn them sideways to use their abilities. And a lot of those abilities are going to mitigate the dice. They're going to give you rerolls. They're going to let you take a die you already used and replace it, add plus or minus 1, whatever. They can help you get to those values that you need, so you're not beholden exactly to the luck of the die.
Yeah, the crew is also going to have a lot of icons on them that help you interact with those missions that we were talking about earlier. If you're in a location where you can complete one of those missions, you're simply going to look on the left-hand upper part of the card of the crew and make sure that you have the icons necessary, and then each of those missions also have a value that you can accumulate by using some of those crew. So you're going to take those crew, and if they're not leveled up, they're going to be exhausted or retire and go to the bottom of your crew quarters. You're effectively going to be cycling through your crew with the crew quarters. Crew are never, at least as far as we've seen, taken completely out of the game.
They go rest.
Yeah.
And you'll have to come back to some of these actions to use them again. So that's where the command and crew quarters actions both come into play. David mentioned that command lets you fight, and it does. If you're in the same space with somebody, you can use command, you can spend your 5 die, and that's how many combat dice you get to roll. That's pretty simple. We'll talk about combat in a second, but that's basically what you do with command, but it also untaps some of your people, or unexhausts them.
Yes.
So you can use them, you can use some of those abilities over and over again. The only other way to get your people back is by resting, which is something you can do. You can kind of take an action, not do anything else, and rest. But using command to unexhaust people is much better. And the crew quarters is where you're going to store all of the crew that you're not currently using. Now, my crew quarters is much thicker than David's. Again,
I had a smaller crew.
Leading into the asymmetry, I have a much bigger crew, which means I will see a wider variety of powers. But David's crew is smaller. He's going to see his same crew, so he can start to rely on seeing some of those same faces over and over, where I might not be able to. If you come to the crew quarters, you can draw crew into your hand. And that's something else that you can do other than placing a die. The other action, you can actually just play a crew that you have in your hand into one of the spots. Now you notice that every action kind of has an icon. It does benefit you to match those, because if you do, you can eventually flip them over from the colored side to the gray side or silver side, which means they're upgraded, which is just a better version of that card.
Yeah, the crew works in a really interesting way. That cycle of having them in their stations, to their crew quarters, into your hand. They kind of have to come from your crew quarters into your hand before you can play them out. So it's kind of like, thematically representing
that rotation.
How you would manage a starship.
All right, and then the last 2 actions are sensors and engineering that you can use. Sensors is another way to explore. You'll get into these situations where you're surrounded by all of these unexplored systems. Sensors lets you explore them. You get to flip them all over, and then you get to peek at all of the different bonuses and choose some in order to actually activate immediately. So you can use your sensors to kind of avoid the negative exploration bonuses and only take the positive ones. And then engineering is going to be a way that you're going to fix your ship or either increase your firepower or your shields. All of those things get into kind of how combat is going to happen. And that's going to happen in 2 different ways. The first way is if you use your command, like I talked about, you can place a die into command, you get to roll that many combat dice, you can fight the different Warbound, you can fight the other players. That's one way. The other way that combat is going to happen is at the end of the round, after everybody is gone, each player is going to have to activate the Warbound with a very specific Warbound deck.
Yeah, the Warbound deck is sitting right here. We've got a discard pile. The first thing you're going to do is look at the value on the top of the Warbound deck to see if there are any Warbound in those sectors with that sort of gravity. We have 3 here. We'd look out here. I don't think anyone is in a 3 right now. In that case, you'd flip it and resolve the back of that card, and that's going to generally do things like spawn more Warbound or do other things or very specifically tell you what to do. Otherwise, if there are ships from the Warbound in those types of sectors, you activate all of them by moving them to the closest player on the board and attacking if possible.
Yeah, they all have a movement and an attack value. And again, that attack value, just like placing a die, is how many dice you're going to roll. Now, there's 2 sides to each one of these. You can decide at the beginning of the game if you want to use the level 1 or the level 2 version. The higher level versions are more powerful. They'll move more. They'll do more damage.
They're not nicer?
They're definitely not nicer. So you can kind of decide as a group what kind of challenge level you want. But whether you're fighting against another player, whether you're attacking the Warbound or whether the Warbound are attacking you, it's all kind of resolved in the same way with those combat dice right there.
Yeah, this is pretty straightforward and interesting. Let's say something was attacking me with 2 of the dice. I'm going to roll these up, and those are the sections that they're going to be attacking. So those are the areas I need to defend. We've got a 6 and a 5. So that's engineering and crew quarters. Now, if I have shields, which is something that you can kind of increase over time, I can use some of those shields to avoid that. Otherwise, you're going to take these damage tokens and place them over some of the die spaces in those boards. Now, like Ryan said earlier, you can use engineering to do some repairs, but that's effectively how combat's going to work, at least incoming towards you.
Yeah, and going against the opponent is kind of the same way. You're placing your damage tokens on their ship. You could place them on your opponent's ships. But if you're attacking the Warbound, you actually get to place it on one of their little boxes here, and it gives you some kind of reward. Rewards can come in the form of experience, which is going to come on your player board and allow you to upgrade some of your units, or it's reputation, which is going to actually sit out on the board and count as victory points in the end of the game. Reputation is also a in-game trigger. You're going to set the reputation value that you want for a short, medium, or long game. We were playing with a reputation value of 9. As soon as somebody hits 9, that triggers the end of the game. Now, that's not a win. That just triggers the end, and then you score points from a variety of different ways. But these tokens are going to be given to you from completing missions, from certain objectives. We're going to have some objective cards in our hand that we can play, and then from combat as well. You're going to get these rewards in either way. Experience is meant to be spent, but these are meant to actually score you points at the end of the game.
Yeah, and that reputation isn't just going to accumulate, it can be taken away too. A lot of the things that will happen in the game, especially with some of these anomaly cards that you'll flip, might tell you to remove X number of reputation from the nearest planet or suffer X, Y, or Z. Yeah. So there's going to be, it's not as simple as like, oh, the first couple rounds I got 9 out there, game end trigger.
Right.
Because it's going to be kind of given and taken away.
And there's one other way the game can end, and that is by destroying another player's ship. So as you're taking damage onto your board, if you ever completely fill up one section of your board, meaning you've put 3 damage tokens, you actually take a damage to your hull. And again, this is something that's a little asymmetric. I have 4 strength in my hull, you have 5. If that is ever removed to 0, your ship blows up, and that is the end of the game. Everybody gets one more turn except for you because your ship's blown up. So, you don't have to necessarily sit there and watch everyone play without you, but it's not a good outcome if your ship is destroyed.
Not the greatest outcome for sure.
So all that's going to be done until one of those 2 victory point conditions are set. You take your actions, you take turns activating the Warbound, and then you do whatever you're trying to do for the episode. Some of these episodes introduce new things. There's some that introduce warp gates, which will allow you to warp around the board, which is cool. And there's, like I said, other new mechanics like co-op, which will be co-op missions will be available. There's some co-op objective cards that you can complete. So while the gameplay itself doesn't change, the actual structure of what you're doing in the game changes quite a bit when you're playing cooperatively versus competitively.
Yeah, the feel of this game, like I said at the very top, is very adventure-y. Between the missions, between the episodes, the ways you can play the game, it's going to feel like a significant adventure injected into a game like this that you'd otherwise think is just standard 4X-y type of things that you're doing. But that is Stardriven Gateway. If you have any questions at all about it, please make them in the comments below. We'll get down there and answer whatever we can. Until next time, though, make sure everyone has fun at the table, and we'll see you then.